welcome to the Lisa at the Edge podcast. It's so good to finally have you on.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for the invite. I'm super happy to be on your podcast. It took a while. I was just, as I mentioned it in other podcasts before, I was waiting for this invite, and then finally we made it happen. So that's awesome.
I thought I'd try and up my game before I got the famous Thomas Maurer on the show. So Thomas, great to have you here today. I'm so excited about this episode. We've got you on, first of all, to hear a little bit more about you, about Thomas, about how you got into tech, a little bit about your career path, and how you landed your very cool job with Microsoft, because it's a very cool role, and I'm sure lots of other people agree. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Azure Arc, which is just a super hot topic at the moment, right? It's a pretty big thing that Microsoft and Azure have come out with. And I think everyone's, I hear it inside Dell from people that I wouldn't expect to hear it from. Everyone's like, what is this Azure Arc? What does this mean? What does it do? So if we could spend some time going through that today, that would be awesome. Does that sound good to you?
Absolutely. No, that is really exciting. I'm really looking forward, especially about the Arc part, because as you know, I'm very excited about speaking about Azure Arc. So really looking forward to that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Okay, excellent. So Thomas, you are a cloud advocate at Microsoft currently. You are a former MVP. You run a super successful blog that it's just, it's amazing. And the content that you deliver there is varied, but it's mostly around Azure, hybrid Azure certifications. And then a topic close to my heart, you recently started to produce content around Azure Stack Hub customer use cases. So I'm excited to delve into all of that. But first I want to ask you, how did you get into tech? How did you get into this career? Did you always plan to sort of be going down this road? Do you have, how did it all begin?
Oh, so that's actually a very interesting question. And I think I'm very lucky and fortunate that when I moved to tech, and I will talk about that in just a second, but I got in there and I really started to appreciating it. And I'm not one of these persons who started with something else and then moved over and has this awesome story to tell how they got into tech. For me, it was pretty simple, but a pretty lucky way I got in there. So in Switzerland, what usually happens is after high school, you decide if you want to go to university or you want to do an apprenticeship. And I decided I want to do an apprenticeship way. So I want to learn. So I was looking at two things which really interested me. One was chemistry. And the other one was IT. So I was both very interesting. And I still, it was so funny. It was, when I think back, I took it you're a young person, right? And then you think, oh, that will be okay. What is better? You don't think too much about it, right? But now I was I could have gone another direction, and I'm probably very sad about that. So I did send out some resumes and ask people to do some test, basically, to come and work for them for a day or something like that, so they would take me or not. And I quickly realized that IT is the thing I want to do. And actually one of these companies then said, okay, hey, you can have a contract with us to start your apprenticeship, which in Switzerland takes 4 years for IT, but it will be open in a year. It will not be open this year, so you can't really do it directly after school. So you need to wait another year. And I was that sounds still interesting, because I loved the company. It was a very small IT company. I think back then it was probably 9 to 10 people, mostly focused on IT services for small and medium-sized businesses, doing Active Directory, Exchange, and all that. Mm-hmm. And I really loved the company, really nice people and everything. So I decided, yep, I'm taking that apprenticeship. And then I just needed to figure out what I do the other year. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, my mom was supporting me, and they saw an option that I can go to England for 10 years. So for 10 months. So I spent 10 months in Eastbourne in the UK. learning English and learning some IT related stuff, but mostly English. Unfortunately, I did not get a British accent or something like that cool or something like that. But yeah, and then I came back and started in IT in my apprenticeship. So that's basically it.
I think that is still a very cool and interesting story. I think I really like the idea of apprenticeships. I mean, I did like a business graduate scheme. It wasn't in tech, although it kind of was. It was for a defense company. And to be fair, that was one of my first exposures to sort of software engineers, systems engineers, people who worked with algorithms for sonars and stuff. But at that time, so that was quite a long time ago. Will not count, but it was quite a long time ago. And they were at that point just discussing about bringing in more apprenticeships. So they'd begun to do some apprenticeships for instance, their software engineers and their systems engineers, but they'd not really brought in apprenticeships to the business grad like type scheme. And they were just talking about sort of opening up that avenue to people to come in and sort of learn on the job kind of thing. And I think that's a great way to go.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful thing. And I think, I don't know how other countries are handling it, but in like Switzerland, it's really like a big part of people are doing this. And we have that basically for all the jobs, right? Usually when you go into a job, you either go to university or you have done an apprenticeship, yep, or you just switch later on. But I think as you said, it's a very powerful way. And for those, I know that like probably you have a lot of viewers from the US. So what it is in Switzerland, we basically, I think if I remember correctly, it was like you're like employed at a company where you like spend, and usually I think like 3 days, at least it was for me, I worked within that company. And the other 2 days a week, I was basically going to school and learned different things for the job, but also mathematics and other things, which was quite interesting. So you had a good mix and a lot of, what I always liked about this was also like you had a lot of colleagues in the company, but then you also have people at school, which you met people from like all other different companies. And it's actually a pretty cool networking thing as well.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to do things. I really like that. Another thing to add to my list of things that I like about Switzerland. So you started off, forgive me if I'm wrong, I was looking at your LinkedIn obviously when I did my super in-depth research, but have you always been sort of involved in the Microsoft world? I seen that one of your first sort of roles listed on LinkedIn is the cloud architect type role. You were an MVP for a number of years. And also, I checked and you've been doing Microsoft certificates, for about 10 years.
Wow. I just realized I'm old. Thank you for looking this up.
I apologize. But so yeah, tell me a little bit about your early roles and how you got into the Microsoft space.
Yep. Yeah. So I haven't done everything on my LinkedIn profile anymore. I just like have the last couple of job roles. But I started like in the company. I did my apprenticeship. I think after that I stayed for another 2 years in that company. And again, that was already very much Microsoft focused, right? So we did, again, as I mentioned, like Active Directory, Exchange, but also a lot of client things like Windows deployments. I think when I started, I think Windows XP just came out, and I think one of my first projects back then when I started the apprenticeship was like installing Windows XP and showing it to the others, because I obviously, as an apprentice, you're the only person who has actually time. Yeah. So, and then quite interestingly, I got asked by a former colleague 2 years later to join a service provider, which they were looking for. They were basically half of the systems were Linux and the other half was Windows-based systems. And that is when he asked me, basically, you want to come to us and work as a system administrator for the Windows and Microsoft part of the company? And I was like, wow, that sounds pretty cool. He sold it to me also very, very well. But I think that was a very smart decision to actually go there, because again, I spent then I think 6 or 7 years in that company. And again, I was very happy, but I needed to see something new.
Mm-hmm.
And working for a service provider back then was like, that was, to be honest, that was gold for me, right? It was like, you can work with so many systems, and like, especially at scale, right? You just, like, I came from a world where companies had 5, 6, 7 servers or something like that. Now I suddenly dealt with hundreds of servers and thousands of clients, which was quite interesting for me.
Yeah, there's been a few people on the podcast that have been in that MSP world. I was in it myself, and I always think that that is such a brilliant place to gain so much experience. And I think from a really wide and varied technical perspective, like you say, but also from a business perspective, dealing with customers, it's just, I think it's just such a great place to learn. And I think you come out with that with a reality view of the world, shall we say, in tech. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, it's like, there's many things, and one is the scale, right? But then also what fascinating me back then was, I always worked for companies where IT was basically in a supporting role. It was just like there because it was necessary. Obviously, today that changes, right? IT becomes a business enabler and all of that, right? But back then it was like kind of like more or less a supporting role. But for a service provider, you're actually the product. Like, you're actually, like, what you do is actually the product. So you basically need to do a lot with even less, because the bigger, the more you can do with less, the bigger the margin, the better for the company. And so that was something else which was very fascinating for me. As well, I got a lot of freedom there. I kind of like was lucky. In one way I was not so lucky, but in the other way I was lucky, because I had the people in the Windows team, they basically kind of like, there was no one there anymore after a while. And so I was like the only person, and I was basically suddenly responsible for all these different systems. So I had a lot of freedom, right? And this is also the time when PowerShell came out. And that was then my little thing where I started to work a lot with PowerShell and build all this automation, because suddenly I realized they had these server check protocols, right? So once a month, the team leads wanted to have like a protocol of all the systems that they were checked, and you need to run certain checks, like, is there enough space? How is the CPU stuff? And obviously we had monitoring systems, but you couldn't do all the checks. So PowerShell came out, and I was like, okay, I spent some time and built this automation so I don't have to do that every single day or every month manually, right? And that was actually pretty cool. And I had some time to like figure things out and build that automation. So yeah, I really enjoyed that time when I think back on that.
I love how you've described basically being thrown in at the deep end as freedom. But I think that is so true. I think that within MSPs, because like you say, they're always trying to do more with less. And you've got customers at different paces as well, that they're, I'm similar in that both MSPs that I worked for, I had a lot of freedom, had a lot of responsibility as well, but freedom to do different things and to think in a different and new way. And I really I'm thankful for my time that I got to do that as well. Very much so. I've very much enjoyed it as well. Okay, so how did you land your current role with Microsoft? Or how did you get into Microsoft with this first role?
Yes, so this is actually my first job at Microsoft, and well, I was which is again, like for those who don't know, like I was an MVP for like 7 years, I think, which is not a job at Microsoft, which is really like an award, basically for the things you do within the community. Yes. And I had my current boss, Rick Claus, actually reaching out to me. I cannot, is it like 2 years ago? Mm-hmm. Is it already that long? He sent me a Twitter message in terms of like, hey, I see this and this and this. And I remember I was at the customer back then, and I didn't really have time to read the whole Twitter message. And first I thought, oh, he wants to build something with community. And I just like, it's an external part. I would be part of that community. And then in the evening, I came back to the hotel. I opened up Twitter again, read his message, and I suddenly realized, that sounds more or less like a job offer. So
Yeah.
that was basically, so he reached out to me. And then we had, I think, two calls, like video calls to basically talk about it. He explained me the role a little bit, what they're looking for. And it's to be honest, it's tough to explain our role.
Yeah.
It's because it's also like very individual, depending on what you want to do as a cloud advocate. There is like, not everyone does exactly the same thing, right? So it's very, very tough to explain that as well. But I was like, okay, that sounds super interesting. Especially, I mean, I was very Microsoft focused anyway. It had a lot of community aspect in it. And so I said, okay, yeah, sounds interesting. Then I had to go to a couple of other interviews. I actually needed to apply, obviously, of the official way to a job, which was on the Microsoft websites, because all our jobs usually go on the website. Applied for that, and then I had a couple of interviews in person during back then Microsoft Ignite, because that was actually when everyone was there from our team and also from the larger organization. So everyone was there, and I had like my interviews in that week.
Nice.
And then I think after that week, it took me like 3 days, and then after that they told me everyone gave me an okay. And then basically the next thing was then we working with HR. But I got really fascinated by the job back then. And again, I'm not sure if I really knew where I get into, but but I liked the team. I liked the colleagues I had. I liked the job. I saw it as a very interesting opportunity back then. And it still is.
Yeah, it is a very cool team. So basically, you're a team of cloud advocates, and therefore you advocate for the cloud, right? So there's a mixture of evangelizing to do with Azure, content creation, community, speaking, etc. Is there anything else that I've missed?
Well, that's all correct. So I always tell people there's like two on a very high level part, and there's two things we do. And one, you said, like creating content and delivering content to the community. But then also the other big part of our team, which is obviously not that visible, but is collecting feedback, right? So we are not a part of like sales or marketing. We are actually really part of directly within engineering. So the ways we can actually interact with the engineering teams is very short. So we go out and we ask our communities and customers, what is working, what is not working for you, what do you wish would be better? And then obviously go back to the different engineering teams and tell them what we think or what the feedback was from our customers, especially because when you look at the different feature teams, they're very often focused on their feature. But obviously, if you're a customer, you use many different features for one solution. So that is something we try then to go out and work with them and bring that together, which is also very interesting when you see like you get some feedback and you can actually provide that information and help the PMs because they are, as you know yourself, right? You need a lot of input from your customers, and it's like for you it's also very time intensive to speak to all these customers. So if you have someone helping you and getting all that information together, definitely is a big factor. So that is also a factor of our job, or a big part of our job as well.
So I wasn't so much aware of that part, I don't think. So that's really interesting. And I think, it's important to have these different avenues of getting feedback and different loops into your customers, because like you say, feedback that maybe will come directly through marketing initiatives might be very different from the feedback that the product and engineering teams might need, because it really depends on who at the customer is filling out that feedback. So I think that's really cool. That is there's some similarity there in what my team does as well. Gathering feedback from our field, so our sales and our pre-sales, and then also where we can customers. That's something actually I'm really looking forward to doing more of, hopefully in the future. I really miss my talking to customers conversations, because that's the cool part, right? When you can actually speak to someone who's using your technology and figure out what problems they're using it to solve. And yeah, I really like that. So that's very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So what I always tell people is like, we're not just advocates for Microsoft within the different communities or customers. We're also advocates for our customers and communities within Microsoft, right? Yeah. So actually going out and telling, hey, this is what our customers want. And I think that is also a big part of our job. And again, as you said, I also can't wait to, again, like, I mean, now engaging virtually with a lot of our customers, but I can't wait to finally go out and meet customers in person again. It's just such a different experience.
Yeah. On that point, Thomas, your role has changed. Like, how has COVID impacted your role? Because it has impacted it massively, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Massively in a way that it's just a complete shift to one thing we were already doing, but we completely removed one other part we did, right? So I remember, I mean, one part is also we went out and we did sessions at different events. One of them was actually Microsoft Ignite the Tour, which was like 30 stops or 30 cities worldwide. And also a lot of other community events. But another part obviously is also doing the online content creation. That was always something we did, right? Which was also part of our team. Now, I remember exactly when I got the news, when suddenly we get like impacted for the first time. And it was I think it was in Copenhagen. I was about to go on stage and do my presentation. And before I started my presentation, I set everything up. I still had like 5 to 10 minutes there. People were still coming in. So I was like reading on my phone. I quickly went to the news page and I saw that the Swiss government, for example, said, okay, you can't do events over 1,000 people anymore. And a lot of other measurements back then that I think that was in March or February, even, I think March. And then the next week we would have had Microsoft Ignite Zurich in Switzerland.
Yes.
And 5 minutes before the presentation in Copenhagen, I realized, okay, that's not gonna happen next week. And so that was then the first cancellation we actually had of events. And then obviously every other event got canceled. So everything we did on the road, basically all the traveling went away, and we completely shifted our focus to creating online content, doing online presentations and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a big impact. It was a big impact in a way that now you sit every day, you sit basically at home and you're creating online stuff, right? While all the time you did the same, but then next week you were probably again on the road, visiting a different city, different customers. That is now moved all to virtual.
Yes, and I suppose if we were going to try and be positive, I imagine, I mean, we were kind of briefly speaking about this earlier, just everyone sort of upgrading their home setups. I think it's because of the sudden focus on online content. I think probably it's given a lot of people to focus on getting better.
Definitely. I mean, that was something I'm just thinking about. Again, as you said, we just talked about like the gadgets, right? We have the cameras and all that, and to make the quality better. I just recently saw one of my video recordings in early March, which I did with the equipment I had back then. And if I compare it to the content I do right now, like the videos I record right now, it's just different in terms of quality. I think we learned a lot during that time. Like a lot of people obviously did that, did learn a lot about different things, but also for us, even though we did already some online work, I think we really needed to step up our game there. And I think that really, in that sense, it really helped us to get better. I think for you, it was also big, like pretty impactful, if I remember. I think you started your job during that time, right? Was that, or did
I started September 2019.
Oh, okay.
So I'd only been in the role around about, what would that be, like 6 months. So started my role in September, had a few trips down to London to meet with people. I was lucky enough to get to Austin. Well, Round Rock, Texas, where the Dell offices are. I think it was in the October. Yeah. And then I made it to Microsoft Ignite the Tour in London in January. Yep. And then I was just getting stuck into my role. We were going to plan customer events in Zurich and in Berlin. And I was supposed to be talking at Dell Technologies World in Las Vegas. And all of that got cancelled. Yeah. So yeah, when lockdown hit, I decided I would start this podcast. I started with my Jabra conference speaker and Zoom, and that was it. And I have added a new mic, a light, a new camera. So yeah, it was definitely, there were lots of opportunities, shall we say.
Yep. No, but actually, again, I think it helped us again to get better in certain things. Obviously, it is a different time, and I would like, if I would need to choose to that this never happened, I would definitely say that should never have happened. But in other hand, I see the positive things, right? You have to see the positive things, and again, we hopefully all stepped up our game again in that. And what I also like, to be honest, about our shift now happened, like when we did all these events, even though a lot of them were free events, not everyone was able to attend such an event, right? Yes. Not everyone was like getting time off or was too far away for them to travel there. And now with the online content, we're actually producing things which like is free, it's online, everyone can access it. The only thing is probably you need a phone or a computer or anything, but you can actually access it and have a look at it. And so that I really like, because we're getting now obviously a much larger reach, and we can reach people we couldn't really reach before with the events we did, but we could reach them with online content, and now offering them more. I think that's definitely a good thing.
I think it's it's proven as a chance to be far more inclusive. Because you're right, whilst events might be free, people might not get time off. Some people have got family constraints. Some people, their employer might not sponsor the travel. They might not be able to afford it, etc. And yeah, it can just be quite difficult, I think, for a lot of people to make these kind of things. And, they might feel a little bit down about missing out on because everyone raves, don't they? Everyone raves about the events and the in-person events and the great community sort of atmosphere that happens. I was particularly gutted this year because I thought it might be my first time in getting to one of the larger Microsoft events. But I agree. I absolutely love that aspect. And I think that all this means is when we do go back into normal, whatever that may look like, we'll be going back in with new and improved skills. We'll have upped our game in this arena. And hopefully what it means is, and I've heard a few people talking about this now who run sort of community user groups, is when we go back to normal, should we have an online version as well? Like, should we make it virtual so that people can attend and feel like they're included? And so it'll be really interesting to see, I think, what happens in that space as well coming out at the end of this. So yes, awesome. Well, thank you for taking us through that little journey. I loved hearing about that. Let's switch topics to Azure Arc. Okay, so this is a hot topic. It's a hot topic. People are going to be interested to hear exactly what this is. But before we jump in to Azure Arc, a topic which I have been ranting about on Twitter recently. There's a lot that I ran about, but one of the most recent ones is multi-cloud. So to me, multi-cloud is suffering the same fate that cloud did and hybrid cloud did, is that it's become a buzzword and everyone is jumping on it. So all different kinds of companies are jumping on it. Everyone suddenly thinks we need to be talking about multi-cloud. We need to have it in our marketing message, and therefore it's out there and people are talking about it in so many different ways. It's causing people to make all kinds of comparisons, which blow my mind. Like I want to bang my head against the wall. Actually, I watched a video this morning from, is it David Kurth?
Oh, it could be.
In the Azure Stack marketing team at Microsoft potentially. We'll check that out. If
David Kurt. Yes. Of course, yeah. He's in Azure. He's now the marketing PMM for Azure Stack Hub and Azure Stack Edge, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and I'll find the video and I'll put it in. I'll get the link and put it in the comments. But and you can check whether I'm right or not. But he has. I watched a short video this morning asking for people's feedback on what is hybrid cloud to them. And he was basically saying the same thing, because there's all kinds of people are comparing Azure Arc to AWS Outpost. They compare Google Anthos to Azure Stack Hub. And I mean, this is something that I get asked as well on the daily. So it's got to the point now where it's a word that whatever you want it to mean. And I always think it's so important if a customer or anyone comes to you and says, I would like to use cloud, I want to use multi-cloud, or I would like to use hybrid cloud, you just almost put that all to the side and you ask them exactly what they're trying to achieve and what they're looking to get out of those things. So I'm going to ask you, I'm actually going to shut up now, stop ranting. And I'm going to ask you, what's your definition of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud? And do they differ from the Microsoft's messaging?
Yeah, so actually you brought up a lot of you probably opened Pandora's box here with me because I
long on it, I promise.
But so yeah, this is very interesting. And again, we had like a lot of customers and people are talking about this, and it's a lot of vocal, like a lot of the CIO talk, like content out there is talking about this. A lot of like the big companies like Gartner covering this as well, right? And there are certain definitions out there which like are correct, but every company looks at it a little bit differently and obviously pushes their product in there where it fits.
Lots of self-serving messaging going on right now.
Absolutely. But so for me, like when I look at multi-cloud, for me, this is just when companies decide to use multiple public cloud providers. It can also be that also like in addition, again, even private cloud stuff is coming together that can also fit in the definition depending on how you actually put it in. But for me, really it is when a company decides like I use multiple cloud providers. And there's also a little bit of a difference. If you look at, for example, like if we speak about cloud, then it can also be about SaaS apps, right? So it could be that you use different SaaS apps in your company, like software as a service stuff. But then you decide for all the platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, you choose one cloud provider. In this case, I wouldn't really talk too much that this is multi-cloud, even though there are multiple cloud providers. For me, it's really when you choose one of these large public cloud providers like Azure, AWS and Google and so on, and you have multiples of those, that for me, I would define as a multi-cloud environment. That said,
we can keep recording, Thomas, because I agree.
Awesome, that's good. I'll be very careful here what I'm saying.
It's so funny. It's such a great topic. I'm going to keep asking this to everybody.
No, but it is again. It is really like seeing that different parts again. Yeah. Now, what is really interesting is when we come to the word hybrid, right, and how we see hybrid within Microsoft. Yeah. Because hybrid really in the past meant that you had Azure and on-prem for as a Microsoft person, right? You had Azure and your on-prem, the customer had their on-prem systems, and they combined that. Yeah. Now, what we did actually, especially when we did like announce Azure Arc and other hybrid products, for us, we realized that there's not just hybrid, or the products do not just touch on-prem. They're also going out, like they're touching Azure, they're touching on-prem, they're touching other cloud providers, and they're touching the edge. So basically everything spans around this, right? So for us, really, when we talk about hybrid, it's not necessarily limited to the customer's on-prem environment, but also the customers using multi-cloud environments. So that is also something which we kind of like a change in our wording is really when we talk about hybrid, we really mean Azure, on-prem, other cloud providers and the intelligent edge. That is kind of like the new definition for us, what we are using, because at the end, it doesn't really matter if you're managing a system in your data center, or if it's running another cloud provider, you need something to manage it, right? And so that is where this is going.
So I think for me, and where hybrid to me is very much probably still that original Microsoft messaging about in Azure and then on-prem, because Microsoft likes to change at a faster pace than everyone else can keep up. But I think that multi-cloud definitely, so when you choose to use different sort of public cloud vendors, we'll not go into it in this episode. I'll maybe do another episode about it, and there's various reasons for that, but it's definitely not that everyone should do that. So if you're saying that, just stop, okay? But hybrid for me is still very much that on-prem and in public Azure. And I mean, what I personally love about the Microsoft portfolio there, the Azure Stack portfolio, of course, is the consistency, right? The consistency now, especially with the new Azure Stack HCI OS coming in, it's just beautiful. It is Azure everywhere within that product, and probably more so now with Azure Arc. But it's just providing that consistency, I think, is so special and important. But yeah, to me, in my head, hybrid is still on-prem, public cloud. Multi-cloud is very much when you're starting to use multiple different clouds. And then obviously we have the edge coming into play as well. Okay, right. Let's shut up about that topic now, because I could talk for days, and we are here for the super exciting topic of Azure Arc. So Azure Arc launched in November 2019.
Yes, the previews were announced back then at Microsoft Ignite, back then in still Orlando.
Yes, the last time in Orlando as well, which I missed out on. Let's not discuss that either. And it was pitched as the ability to bring Azure management and capabilities to any infrastructure, which is that's a big thing to say, and to also enable Azure services to run anywhere. And these were two pretty big claims, right? So talk to us a little bit about that. What is high level 101 pitch? What is Azure Arc?
Yep. Yeah, you covered that pretty well. Pretty good, obviously. It is actually really it does, like I always say, it does two things. It's bringing Azure management, and secondly, also Azure services to any infrastructure, right? So there are two things. First of all, we allow you to use the Azure management things we have for your existing stuff you have, like servers, Kubernetes clusters, and others. But then on the other hand, we also allow you to bring down Azure services like Azure managed SQL instances to your infrastructure wherever you need them. And I think that is also very interesting if you look at our hybrid portfolio. And I think this is also where people are sometimes asking, so does that mean we still need Azure Stack and things like that? And I definitely it's like, yeah, of course, it depends, right? If you compare us to other cloud providers out there, I think one of the main differences, especially when it comes to hybrid, is that we have this whole range of solutions depending on what the customers need, right? So for some customers, they probably need some cloud-inspired infrastructure, and Azure Stack or the Azure Stack family or the Azure Stack portfolio is the right way to go. Some others, they just need Azure Arc for the management experience, or they even need to combine them, right? So while other cloud providers probably have a single product which can do that specific thing. And that may be great for some customers, right? But if you look at hybrid, I think that is much, much more. And that is also where Azure Arc now comes into play and it opens up a whole new world, is that our customers said, hey, well, there's two things I want to do. First of all, we really like the Azure management experience. I love to manage my Azure resources from the Azure portal or with the CLI or PowerShell or the APIs or whatnot. I love to use the Azure Resource Manager, the construct we have there with like tagging and managing and all that. And secondly, I also love the management services like update management, like or security services like Security Center. So I want to use that not just for my Azure services or my Azure machines, I also want to use that for services which are running outside of Azure. Yeah. And again, that is where this hybrid tone comes in. That can mean on-prem in the customer's data center, at the edge, can be branch offices or other locations, cruise ships, for example, as well, or even multi-cloud environments. And so we can span. So what we did is actually we extended Azure Resource Manager with Azure Arc and allowed Azure Arc basically to bridge resources into Azure, to the Azure Resource Manager. And I hope you see what I did there with Bridge and Arc and stuff like that. So that is one part where we have the management. That is what we heard from our customers, right? I want to use the Azure management for basically everything.
Yeah.
The other story is that our customers tell us, look, we love the Azure services. For example, we love Azure SQL. It's like we love the security aspect of it. We love that it's a service. We love that we can scale it out and scale it up and whatever we need. But there are reasons why we can't use it for everything we do, right? There can be, as we discussed, the same thing with Azure Stack. It can be that there are data sovereignty issues where they can't move it to an Azure region, which is close by. There are networking issues with latency, for example, where they say, okay, our applications can't handle that much latency. Yeah. And bring it down, and of course, many other reasons as well. But now Azure Arc enables them to bring, for example, Azure SQL and other Azure services in their data center or their location wherever they need them. So they can run now, for example, Azure SQL in their data center, on their cruise ship, in their branch office, or even at another cloud provider, right? So I think that is pretty cool. And again, this is just one example, right? With Azure SQL, there's other services which we already have, like Azure Postgres as well. And then you can imagine that some customers already have wishes for more of our Azure services in that way.
Yes. So currently, basically Azure Arc is bringing Azure Resource Manager, also known as ARM, which has also been called the secret sauce, the really good stuff. It's the bit that everyone's seen value in when they come to use Azure. It's taking that and extending it out to infrastructures. And then underneath that, there's sort of some different offerings. So we've got Azure Arc enabled servers, which is currently GA. We've got the Azure Arc enabled data services, which is in preview. And we've got Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, which is in preview.
Yes, correct. Yep. And there's even a third one, which or two other ones I would mention, which we kind of like didn't talk too much, but the other one would be like Azure enabled SQL servers. So not Azure SQL, but actually taking your existing SQL servers, attaching those to Azure as well. Yep. And then those provide you, for example, security recommendations from Azure Security Center. So they will go out and we have some best practices. And you can basically, if you run a couple of Azure SQL servers, not like Microsoft SQL servers, we could give you and scan them and say, hey, there is something which you should change in your configuration to make it more secure.
Yeah. So if you were running them within Azure, you get the same insights and information.
Yes. It's actually as you would run a SQL server in an Azure VM, you can enable Security Center and you get all these recommendations. Now you run a SQL server, like a normal Microsoft SQL server in your own data center, but then you also get the recommendations, the Azure Security Center recommendations for that server as well. Yeah. And then the fifth one, which is now the new one, which is in public preview, which is Azure Stack HCI, which has basically Azure Arc built in, right? So you actually take that and you connect it and you get that management experience directly from Azure. So we don't really highlight too much that this is Azure Arc, but it's actually Azure Arc enabling that experience.
And to be honest, Thomas, let's not highlight it as Azure Arc, okay? Because let's not have any more confusion on the Azure Stack portfolio. Let's just leave it alone for about 6 to 12 months in terms of naming, okay? Because it needs to stay there. But yes, you're very right. The thing that enables Azure Stack HCI in its new OS is Azure Arc having that built in and being able to deploy and consume that as a service. very cool. What I find very cool about Azure Arc enabled servers, I keep wanting to say services, servers, is the fact that you do Windows, Linux, virtual and physical, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And the fact that then you can say, you like you said with Azure Security, but even the Azure policy service around tagging, resource groups, etc. Like that's amazing to me. So you don't want to have one management experience for your on-prem or albeit in another public cloud, etc. And then one experience in Azure. And if you can just look in the Azure portal, take all the goodness like Azure policies, etc., and spread that across your different infrastructures, that's powerful.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you brought this up. This is something, I did a presentation on Azure Arc, and I usually do that for a lot of technical people. They okay, I can now install updates and manage these for my server and so on. However, one person came up to me and told me like, he's doing a lot of compliance features for customers, and he supports, a lot of the legal part as well, and does, okay, we need to have a compliance. And in Azure, again, we have some really cool features for using Azure policy, right? Where you can actually go out and say, hey, I need to be ISO certified, and then you deploy your policies, which audits your Azure environment and even your operating systems running in Azure VMs to find out, hey, did I configure everything correctly? Now, with Azure Arc, as you said, we can take these policies and also apply these to virtual and physical machines running Windows and Linux on-prem or at another cloud provider. And you see that all in a single portal. You can go to Azure Policy and see which of my server is not compliant with my company policies. Yeah. And this is super powerful. This is like, I mean, if I show that to someone, I often get the feedback, okay, this is really what we need. We want to have that overview. And that is pretty cool.
That specific example right there just shows that you don't necessarily have to have that much running in Azure to take it to take advantage of this. Like, even if the majority of your stuff is on premises, like this could be a brilliant way to figure out what your cloud operating model looks like and begin to sort of change that mindset. Because I mean, anything that you can do around auditing and policy and things like that and make that better for people is going to sell them, if you're not already sold. So I just think that that's insane. And then also on the Azure Arc enabled data services. So this was new to me when I was reading up, because I don't think I'd quite clicked that actually it was Azure SQL managed instance on-prem.
Yep.
I don't think I clicked that. Going back to what you just said earlier about being able to run the same kind of securities, etc., on your SQL servers, that's what I had in my head. I didn't realize that you were actually bringing managed SQL instance to on-prem. So that is a PaaS service, right?
Yep, exactly. So you get the same experience as you have with Azure SQL, basically, to like where you can do it as the scaling features we have there, where you can, for example, also get the whole security part. You don't need to take care of patching and all of that. The same experience basically then comes down into your data center, right? And so we give you the same thing. It's also a service, so it will run, and we will take care of keeping it current in that sense. That you don't need to go out and manually patch all your servers or whatever. Now, the interesting part, by the way, I'm not sure if you saw that, how we actually do this, but when I saw it the first time, that is what I really found actually very interesting was, it's not a bunch of virtual machines you need to deploy or anything. What you need basically as a prerequisite for Azure SQL with Azure Arc data services is a Kubernetes cluster. That's your prerequisite. And then the whole service is designed based on containers. Yeah. So you basically just run a script, which then basically sets up your environment with the, we call it the data controller, which is basically the controller of the Azure SQL part, or the Azure Arc Data Services part. And then you can go out and start managing that like from Azure, but you could also use, for example, your SQL Management Studio to actually connect on-prem directly to that, right? So you're not creating that dependency to the cloud where it wouldn't run if there is no more connection or anything. It still runs. You can still manage it using it on-prem tools, but obviously if you have connection, you get all that benefit.
Yeah, because I also, so that's interesting, that, and that answers my question when I was reading. It said that it was available in disconnected and connected. Because I like to keep track of all of these, what you can and what you can't do, so that I can easily explain between Azure Edge, Azure Stack HCI, Azure Stack Hub, Azure Arc enabled data services. What are all the different, because like you said earlier, the difference is that Microsoft does provide that breadth of portfolio. Now, the con to that, sometimes we get a little bit confusion. If you're anything like me and you're indecisive, that might be a nightmare. But it also means that you can very much pick something that's tailored to you. And it almost gives varied options in terms of depth of how much you want to go into having Azure elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, I agree. And especially like what I also like excited that you brought up, like it is very, because we have that portfolio of hybrid products and services and solutions, right? It's not that easy if you go out and you need to tell every customer, what do you have? You can speak like for 4 days and like bring all that together. I think what I realized speaking a lot with customers is I usually start to ask them, what do they actually want to build, right? So what do they want to build? And sometimes then it turns out I will just tell them, look, okay, for this part, we actually need some infrastructure. So probably like we want to have this consistent experience. You probably need an Azure Stack Hub for that. For this part, you probably just want to have some management experience. And so you can leverage Arc or you can combine it. And so it's hard to, like, if you need to go out because we have so much and we try to enable, obviously, like depending on what the customer needs, we try to help him, right? Doesn't matter. We have some customers which are using the cloud and then they need to have something at the edge or at other cloud providers, and we want to give them these services. But then we also, as you brought up very early, it's like these services are not just made for customers who are already using the cloud like crazy. It's also for customers who have a on-prem environment and they want to make their on-prem environment better using Azure services, right? So they don't need to go out and move everything to Azure. I mean, I like when they do that, but they can also like keep on running their stuff, but use Azure services to make that what they have even better. And I think we did not always a good job telling people that, because we have some really great services. Also, if you think about update management or Azure File Sync and all of that, that is something you can leverage with your existing on-prem environment and to just make it better. So I think there's multiple ways where a customer can be. And depending on who we are talking to, we need to have a kind of like a different approach of telling them to make it more understandable what we're actually doing.
Absolutely. I think people forget this, but I like how you said, I like to go into the customer and ask what they want to achieve. I feel like that's a very important step that sometimes people miss.
Which is sometimes not that easy, because very often customers don't even know what they actually want to, right? You brought this up earlier, like multi-cloud and hybrid cloud is like in everyone's mind. And sometimes just they get probably from the CIO, they get down, we need to do multi-cloud. And then they come to you, what do you offer for multi-cloud? And then you need to go, okay, well, there's a lot.
Yes, I know. It's so interesting right now to watch. Like, for instance, right, a lot of customers now, Microsoft and Amazon are going in at that C level and they are battling out, right? And almost everything underneath that level is not really, potentially not being involved. You're not really sure what they have. And then suddenly they've been sold one or the other and they feel like they need to stick to it. And then they've got this. It happened with cloud in general when everyone was like, we have a cloud first strategy. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? Well, our execs want us to go to cloud. Okay. But what does that mean? Like, they want you to go to cloud. So let me try and ask another question. Why? What are you hoping to achieve from that move? What are you hoping to engage, improve? Is it faster time to market? Is it expanding your reach? Is it efficiency savings? Is it increase your security? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And I think now more than ever, that is still so important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just said like they got sold one or the other. Hopefully they got sold the right one. Then at least it's like it makes their life better. Just kidding on that one.
No,
but
I kind of agree. Of course. I'm never going to get anybody AWS on the show now.
But yeah, you're making a very good point in terms of like you need to define what should be the business outcome. What is your motivation of doing that, right? And that is with all the technology and all the adoption, and if it's hybrid or even if it's just cloud or whatever it is, you need to have some sort like find out what the motivation is. And I find that is something which I find very interesting. We have that in the cloud adoption framework, which is kind of our for those who don't know, this is kind of like our proven guidance on how to set up your Azure environment and all of that. This like uses a lot of like architecture things. It talks a lot about like how things should be done in technical sense, but it starts way earlier. It starts with the strategy and why are you doing this and finding the motivation of what you try to achieve, and then also to measure the success you have, because like if you just move everything, was it successful or not? Who can answer that question, right? You need to first know why you're doing this. So absolutely great point.
Actually, I read an article just a couple of days ago that talked about the difference between return on investment and return on innovation.
Yep.
And how you absolutely need to change your way of thinking from return on investment to return on innovation when you are analyzing whether your move to cloud is successful or not, or why you want to move to cloud. And I loved that. I was like, that is a brilliant analogy. And I think we need to see more of that. I've said that before with the cloud adoption framework, that regardless if you're moving to Azure or not, use the first half of it to use the first half.
Oh, yeah.
The first part of it, just to think about, I think I want to move to cloud. Work through that, do that bit first, and then you can look at where you want to go and, you know, which cloud provider you might want to go with, and which hardware vendor you might want to go with. And we all know that for Azure Stack, that would be Dell is the best. I won't ask you to comment, Thomas, because I'm not in a difficult position, so I'll just say it. But yeah, it's so true. And I think now more than ever, it's just funny. I just see multi-cloud going through the same thing that cloud and hybrid cloud, and I'm like, can we please just stop putting out like self-serving marketing BS and actually help customers understand? Because I think, like you said there, we're now at a point where it's not the technology holding us back. We now have the technology that would allow customers, wherever they are, to achieve what they need to achieve. It's customers understanding what the possibilities are and then how they apply to their business, and then helping them with that roadmap. I think that's an important area.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something we had discussions on where it's like, and again, this is not Microsoft saying that, this is now just me. If we think about all these things happening, right, and we talk about like hybrid and multi-cloud and all that, I personally believe that these kind of like talks and kind of like sense this is probably going way in the future, because it just becomes the new normal of doing things, right? Why would you even care if you're doing hybrid or multi-cloud or whatnot? At the end, you just choose the best solution, whatever you want to achieve. Yeah. And if that is running stuff in your own data center and a little bit in the cloud and a little bit at the edge and maybe another service provider, that's fine, right? I don't need to have a name for this. I think at one point it will become the new normal. It will be just the standard of doing things. And it also, I'm not saying that everyone goes fully into the cloud, but maybe attaches cloud services. And it's just, you pick the right place for your stuff, what works best for you.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And one last thing that I meant to touch on with Azure Arc was pricing. It's always an interesting question. So interestingly, Azure Arc, now let me know if I get this wrong, is free for enabled servers, which is, again, quite powerful for those customers who, like I said earlier, don't need to have a lot going on in Azure.
Yep.
You can have a little bit going on in Azure, or you could just start, embracing Azure Arc for your service to figure out what your cloud best practices, governance, etc. might look like if you were to move to Azure. I think that's quite impressive.
Yep. So yeah, it should be easy, right? And it's, as you said, you're absolutely right. So it's free if you onboard the server to Azure Arc. That is like, if you deploy that, the server will show up in the Azure portal and in Azure Resource Manager. Doesn't matter if you use the CLI and whatnot. And then you can also go out and enable certain services. Like if you then start, for example, to enable monitoring, like you get insights and you get information like that, what happened will be that you install the log analytics agent, and that will then send data to Azure. And you then pay obviously for the Azure Log Analytics workspace and the traffic you go put in there. That is then, you pay them specifically for that service. Azure Arc itself doesn't add any cost, but the Azure Log and the additional services like Azure Log Analytics, those add additional costs. The same thing for policy. Azure Guest Configuration Policy for Azure VMs is free. For Azure Arc servers, Azure Arc enabled servers, there is a cost. I think it's like $6 or $7 a month, but don't count me on that. Just check out the pricing calculator for those people who are watching. Just when you enable that for one server instance, right? So depending, maybe some people say, I don't need the policy part, right? So I'm not going to enable it. I'm not going to use it. Then you don't pay for it. Some people say, I don't need the log analytics part. I'm not going to pay for that. So it's really depending on how you're going to use it. But again, as you said, it's very powerful that you can actually go out and onboard these services. And then you can just get an immediate benefit in terms of that you get the whole inventory. You can use tagging. You can use the subscription part, and you can actually go out and say, hey, for example, I use the governance part. So for example, I use tags to find out which server belongs to which department, for example. Yeah. You can do that for free.
The inventory part, like how powerful is that? So I'm sure some people who are watching have been involved in trying to do inventory of your infrastructures within data centers, etc. Let's not lie to ourselves. That's difficult, and it's difficult to keep up to date in spreadsheets or however you're managing to do it. So even that's just like super powerful.
About inventory, I can tell you a couple of interesting stories about that. And again, it's hard to do, and it's an immediate benefit, I think, for most companies if they can do it. So I need to smile. There are like two stories popping into my head, which are kind of like insane, of like finding missing servers and stuff like that. Which is just insane.
I think that if doing anything like that, or running, say, like Azure Migrate, that gathers all the information before you were to move, even if you are not planning to move, or you think it's far into the future or whatever, taking advantage of just some of these services that are out there to help customers move to the cloud, that gather all that information on your infrastructure and your environments, like they are gold. Like I would just be using them anyway to like tidy up everything that I have,
Yep. And then suddenly you then start to realize that there are other services which then okay, you have everything, you have the inventory, and then you suddenly realize, I also need to patch all my servers, right? So why not just go out and enable Azure Update Management, and then schedule all my patching twice a week or twice a month or whatever it needs to be for all my servers, and go out and do all that nicely planning of different groups and stuff. Or you get out and say, hey, I want to see if everything is really secure. And then you go out and enable Azure Security Center on these machines. And then you see suddenly, there is something not really nicely configured. And so on, right? You get, and suddenly you realize the benefit, what we can actually offer from the cloud.
And do you know what? I like your point there earlier as well, where you're choosing to enable whatever you want to use, and then you can turn it off. So instantly you've brought this pay as you consume to your on-prem or wherever else that you've got them. And I just think, in case you haven't guessed, I'm just super excited about this.
I'm happy because I'm too. So,
You know what's funny is that just before me and Thomas started recording this podcast, we spoke about time and how long we were like aiming at to do the episodes. And I've been known for my lengthy podcast episodes. And I was going to try, when I was bringing them to YouTube, be a bit tighter on my timelines, but I just don't really want to restrict good conversation. So we're looking at, we've probably gone over time already, but that was a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm so glad that you're going to be on the YouTube channel as well. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciated it and really enjoyed our conversation. Again, we could probably go on for hours. Not sure if everyone wants to listen to us, but I definitely appreciate the conversation and all the work you do for the community and our customers. So was really happy to be part of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Thomas. And I'm sure we'll be speaking again soon. See you later.